Good morning, everyone. My name is Alamar Enriquez, your first reporter for this topic. Our topic is all about taxation. So, what comes in your mind if you hear the word taxation? So, taxation, it is a term for when a taxing authority, usually a government, levies or impose a financial obligations on its citizen or residents. So, taxation also it is a imposition of compulsory levies on individuals or entities by governments. So, taxation is the inherent power of the state to impose and demand contribution upon persons, properties, or rights for the purpose of generating revenues for public purposes. So, let's, for example, of tax is general and selective sales tax, value added tax, taxes on any aspect of manufacturing or production, taxes on legal transaction, and import duties. So that is the taxation. So when we say taxation, it is a compulsory or it is a compulsory for the especially to the government employee. So there are two significance of taxation. The first is the primary purpose. So when we say a primary purpose of taxation, it is the to generate funds to defray expenses incurred by the government in promoting the general welfare of its citizenry. So primary purpose of the taxation is to contribute the well-being of the country as a whole. So the basic function of taxation is to fund government expenditures. So when we say expenditures, it is the gastusin ng gobyerno. So the other purposes of tax is to equitably contribute to the wealth of the nation and to protect new industries, to protect local producers. So the principles and theories of taxation. So there are three principles and theories of taxation. The first is the benefit principle. So this principle is refers to the individual should be taxed in proportion to the benefits they receive from the government. So let's for example is benefit principle is utilized most successfully in the financing or road and highways through levies on motor fuels and user fees. So that is the example of benefit principle. So in benefit principle also it included the DPWH is the most pay taxes. It's because this should be paid by those people who receive the direct benefit of the government programs and projects out of the taxes paid. So the next principle is the ability to pay principle. So these principles hold that taxes should relate with the people's income or the ability to pay. So let's for example is those who earn more money are expected to pay a higher rate of taxes, which means a higher portion of their income than people who earns less money. So ibig sabihin itong principles of the ability to pay in taxation is yung may sapat na kakayahan na magbayad ng tax. So remember that governments impose taxes to pay for services like public schools, roads, police, and the government. So that is the ability to pay principles. The last is the equal distribution principle. So these principles is income, wealth, and transaction should be taxed at a fixed percentage. So in equal distribution principles, it determines who earn more and buy more. So people who earn more and buy more should pay more taxes but will not pay a higher rate of taxes. So that is the equal distribution principles. There are four characteristics of tax. So these characteristics of tax is it is enforced contribution. It means ipinatupad na batas na ang tax ay compulsory sa lahat ng antas ng karapat-dapat magbayad ng buwis. So its payment is not voluntary nature. So hindi voluntary. So it is a imposition, is not dependent upon the will of the person tax. So it enforced. So ipinatupad talaga ang pagbayad ng tax. So the second is it is generally payable in cash. So this means that payment by tax or the payment by the tax is this kind of payment, for example by checks, promissory notes, or any kind, is not accepted. It is only because tax is only payable in cash. So hindi tumatanggap ng promissory notes or mga cheque. So the third is it is proportionate in character. So payment of taxes should be based on the ability to pay principles. The higher income of the taxpayer, the bigger amount of the tax. So the characteristics of tax, it included the ability to pay. Kung mataas ang income, so dapat ang kukunin na tax ay nakabase sa kanyang income. So the bigger the income of the payer, the bigger the amount of the tax paid. So the last is it is levied to impose, collect on per person or property. So there are taxes that are imposed or levied on act, rights, or privileges. Example is the documentary tax. There are the classification of tax. There are three. The first is as to who bears the burden. So this classification of tax we will discuss by the next reporter. So it included the direct tax, the indirect tax. As the purpose of the classification of taxes is the general tax, special tax. As to scope, the national tax or the local tax. So pag sinasabi natin national tax, it is imposed and collected by the national government through the Bureau of International Revenue or the BIR. So when we say local tax, it is imposed and collected by the local government. So the structures of a tax system. So there are three structures. So the first is a tax is proportional. So meaning the government takes an amount of money from a person which is in direct proportion to his income. Example, Ben's salary is 10,000 pesos and the government is deducting 10% of the salary for tax. After a year, his income increases to 15,000 pesos and the government now deduct 12% of his salary for tax. That said that tax is proportional. So when we say proportional, all taxpayers are required to pay the same percentage of their income. So depends on the income of the person. So, for example, kay Ben, his salary income is 10,000 pesos. So, the government deducting 10%. So, if your income is 15,000, so the government will deduct 12% in the tax. So, that is the proportional. So, when we say a tax is regressive, meaning that the government takes a larger percentage of a person income per tax while he is receiving a lower income. Example is salary. Ben's salary is 10,000 and the government is asking him to pay 15 of his salary for tax, which is contrary to our given example in number 1. So hindi pwede na kapag na ang salary ni Ben is 10,000 tapos magbabayad siya ng 15%, so hindi 'yun dapat. So kasi a tax is regressive, it is imposed in such manner that tax decrease as the amount subject of taxation increase. So kung ano ang kanyang income, so dapat equal ang kukunin na salary tax deduction. So that last is a tax is regressive. So meaning that the government takes a larger percentage of his salary for tax due to his high salary. Example, Ben has monthly income of 30,000 pesos and the government deducted 20% of his salary for tax. The tax amount is proportionately equal to someone's status in the society. A rich man should pay more than a poor man. So in progressive tax, it is one where the average tax burden increase with income. So, dapat kung, di ba, sabi sa regressive, a rich man should pay more than a poor man. So, ibig sabihin na mas malaki ang bayad ng isang mayaman or ang mataas na income compare sa less income. So, that is the tax regressive. So the basic principles of a sound tax system. So the first is the fiscal adequacy. Means that in a fiscal adequacy that the sources of revenue must be sufficient to meet government expenditures and other public needs. So means that the sources of revenue tax as a whole should be sufficient to meet the expanded expenditure for the government regardless of business, export taxes, trade balances, and problems of economic adjustment. Revenue should be capable expanding or contracting annually in response to variations of public expenditures. So the second is the equality or theoretical justice. Means that the taxes levied must be based upon the ability to pay of the citizen. So that is the theoretical justice. So the burden should be proportionate of the taxpayer's ability to pay. This is called ability to pay principle. So the third is the administrative feasibility. So it means that tax laws and regulation must be capable of being effectively enforced with the less inconvenience to the taxpayer. So the last is the consistency or compatibility with economic goals. So this refers to the tax laws that should be consistent with economic goals for programs rather of the government. So these are the basic services intended for the masses.
Good day, everyone. My name is Julian Sempeño, and I'm the second reporter of the group 4, which is taxation, the concept of taxation. So, this is the continuation of the concept of taxation. Distinction of tax. So, first is tax distinguished from toll. A tax is demand of sovereignty, while toll is demand for proprietorship. So, a tax is paid for the use of the government's property while a toll is paid for the use of another property. So, a tax may be imposed by the government only, while a toll is enforced by the government or a private individual or entity. So, second, we have tax distinguished from penalty. A tax is intended to raise revenue, while penalty is designed to regulate conduct. So, a tax may be imposed by the government only, while a penalty may be imposed by the government or a private individual. Next, we have tax distinguished from debt. A tax is based on law, while a debt is based on a contract. So, a tax may not be assignable, while a debt is assignable. So, a tax is generally payable in cash, while debt is payable in cash or in kind. A person may be imprisoned for non-payment or taxes, but any person may not be imprisoned for non-payment of debt. So, another one is tax distinguished from other terms. So first we have revenue. This refers funds or income derived by the government whether from tax or any other source in another sense. So second we have internal revenue. So if tax distinguished from other terms have revenue, of course, it's have internal revenue. Internal revenue, it refers to taxes imposed by the legislator other than duties on imports and exports. So, we have custom duties. Custom duties, these are taxes imposed on goods exported into a country. So, so that is the custom duties. So, entities exempted from taxation. So, among ini mga exempted from taxation. So, first we have religious institution. Second, charitable institution. Non-profit, non-stock educational institution. Non-profit cemeteries, government institution, and last is foreign diplomats. So, situs of taxation. Situs is a Latin term which means situation or location or place. In short, its literal meaning refers to a place taxation. In real property, the rules is tax is imposed to a place or state where the property is located and subject to be taxed has jurisdiction over the said property. So, moving on. So, double taxation has two duplicate. So, first is direct duplicate and indirect duplicate. So, the elements of direct duplicate have taxing twice by the same taxing authority within the same taxing jurisdiction for the same purpose in the same taxable period, and last is involving the same purpose. So in indirect duplicate, we have indirect duplicate taxation. On the other hand, occurs when taxes on the property are not imposed by the same taxing authority. So the local and national governments impose taxes on the same property during one taxable period. This kind of imposition is legal. So moving on, so forms of escape from taxation. 6 forms of escape from taxation. So first we have shifting. Shifting, it is a one way of passing the burden of tax from one person to another. Example, taxes paid by the manufacturer may be shifted to the consumer by adding the amount of the tax paid to price of the product. So, kinds of shifting. We have 3 kinds of shifting. First is forward shifting. A forward shifting occurs when the burden of the tax is transferred from a factor of the production to the factor of distribution. So second, we have backward shifting. Backward shifting occurs when the burden of tax is transferred from the consumer to the producer or manufacturer. So last, we have onward shifting. Onward shifting occurs when tax is shifted to two or more times, either forward or backward. So next we have capitalization. So capitalization, this refers to the reduction in the price of the tax object to the capitalized value of future tax which the purchaser expect to be called upon to pay. Example, a reduction made by the seller on the price of the real estate in anticipation of the future tax to be shouldered by the future buyer. So next we have transformation. This this transformation occurs when the manufacturer or producer upon whom the tax has been imposed pays the tax and endeavor to recoup or make up for himself by improving his process of production. So next we have tax evasion. This tax evasion is the practice by the taxpayer through illegal or fraudulent. Fraudulent means to defeat or lessen the amount for tax. This is also known as tax dodging. So, next we have tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is the exploitation by the taxpayer of legally permissible method in order to avoid or reduce tax liability, and this is also known as the tax minimization. So, we have also tax exemption. Tax exemption is the grant of immunity or freedom from a financial charge or obligation or burden to which others are subjected. So, grounds for tax exemption: contract wherein the government is the contracting party, so public policy and reciprocity. So that would be all. Thank you.
Classification of taxes. Number 1. Classes of taxes as to subject matter. Personal tax or capitation tax or poll tax, ito yung tinatawag natin na community tax. Mostly siguro sa atin is nakapagbayad na nito. Ang community tax or local tax mostly paid in a city hall or municipality. So like cedula. Next, property tax. Ang example niyan ay ang real property tax. Ang property tax, ito ini-impose upon the asset of property real or personal situated within the territorial jurisdiction of the state. Hindi ito ini-impose sa tao. Ini-impose ito sa property. Next is privilege tax or exercise tax. It refers to those taxes imposed on the taxpayer exercising their rights. Anong example niyan? Donor and estate tax. So ano ba ang donor tax? Kapag nag-donate ka ng property or pera, magbabayad ka ng tax. Pag naman namatay ang isang tao or meron siyang state, ibig sabihin ng state is meron siyang properties na naiwan na ipapamana niya sa kanyang pamilya or mga relatives, ay kukuhaan yan ng tax. Yan yung example ng privilege tax. Number 2, classes of tax as to scope or authority. A. National, dalawa lang yan. We have national tax and the local tax. So, pag national, it is imposed by the BIR, Bureau of Customs, under the Department of Finance. So, example niyan ay ang income tax, custom duties, and tariffs. Pag local tax naman, it is imposed by what? Um, by the local government, example, barangay, cities, municipalities, or provinces. Example naman yan is ang real estate and community tax. Number 3, classes of tax as to purpose. Para saan ba ang purpose niyan? General tax is imposed for general purpose. Ibig sabihin yan, yung proceed noon pumupunta sa national or general fund. So, example niyan is state tax. B, pag specific tax naman, it refers to the tax imposed for the special purpose wherein your proceeds noon pumupunta sa special funds. An example niyan ay yung gasoline tax. Number 4, classes of taxes as to liabilities. So, we have the direct and indirect. Ang pinag-uusapan kasi dito is ay kung sino yung magbabayad ng tax. Pag direct tax, it is imposed upon the person directly bound to pay the tax. So, kung sino yung or kung saan siya ini-impose, siya rin yung magbabayad ng tax. Ang example niyan is ang income tax, 'di ba? Ang income tax is based on the income of the person. So, siya dapat ang magbayad ng tax. Pag sinasabi naman nating indirect tax, so ito yung mga taxes na pwedeng ipasa. It can be shifted or passed to another person for payment. Ang pinaka-example niyan is yung VAT, value added tax. Di ba kapag bibili ka ng goods, nag-acquire ka ng service, merong katagang na VAT. Kasi nga, yung VAT na yon is ipinasa sa mga buyer para yung mga buyer ang magbabayad ng tax na yon, not the seller.
By the way, I'm Pretzel Ingin. My report is the continuation of taxation. I discuss the classes of taxes as to determination of amounts. A. Specific tax. Specific tax refers to those taxes imposed upon property or rights, which amounts are determined based on weight or volume capacity or any physical unit of measurements. Example, exists tax on liquors and cigarettes. So, in cigarettes, alam naman nating lahat na ang sigarilyo ay nakakasama sa ating kalusugan. So, this is the first reason kung bakit mayroon itong specific tax. This kind of tax is being implemented para ipataw ang pagtaas ng buwis ng sigarilyo. It is also effective at reducing demand. Decreasing demand can be a way also para ang lahat ng user or consumers ay mapilitang hindi na gumamit ng sigarilyo or less user or consumers. B. Ad valorem tax refers to those tax imposed upon property of rights, which amounts are determined based on sales price or other specified values of tax properties. Example, value added tax. In ad valorem tax, the VAT or value added tax is being applicable. For example, when a customer purchases a cup of coffee, they are essential or obliged to pay VAT or the value added tax for the entire production process from cultivation, purchase of coffee beans, processing and final product, since coffee becomes valuable
at each stage. Classes of taxes as to graduation of rates. A. Progressive or graduated tax refers to those taxes imposed upon person, properties, rights, which amount of tax increases as the bracket layer increases. Example, gift tax or state tax. Progressive or graduated tax is a tax system that increases rates as the taxable income goes up. The example of progressive tax, it also includes investment income taxes, tax on interest earned, rental earnings, estate tax, and tax credit. Like for example, in rental earnings, although there is a chance to deduct all the costs associated with building operations, once they are done, this is a very progressive kind of tax since it targets those who invest in rental property. In regressive tax refers to those taxes imposed upon person, properties, rights, which amount of tax decreases as the bracket layer increases. At present, there is no regressive tax in the Philippines. So the opposite of the progressive tax is the regressive tax rate, where tax liability reduces as the taxable amount increases. The proportionate tax refers to those taxes imposed upon persons, properties, or rights, which amount of tax may be higher or lower depending upon the bracket or classification. So a proportional or flat taxes system assists the same tax rate on everyone regardless of income or wealth of a businessman. Ito ay nakadepende ng kita or classification ng isang businessman.
So, good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Charlene E.S. Verdoso. My topic for this afternoon is all about taxation. RA 10963, Train Law. So, police power. Power to legally tax to use for public purposes. Second, power to eliminate domain, the transfer of real estate title in exchange for payment of compensation is a process of means by which the sovereign through its law-making body raises income to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So taxes are lifeblood of the nation. It is necessary to run the government. Taxation is the power of the state to impose charges to burden upon person poverty rights for the use and support the government and to able to discharge its appropriate function. The state purpose tax for the following reason. The state imposed tax for the following reason: to raise revenue, to regulate, to protect. Train Law RA 10963. Train Law. Tax Reform for Elective and Inclusion Act of 2017. Next, part of President Duterte Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. Replace the National Internal Revenue Code 1997. Future. charged in income tax. It is charged on total income of every for the previous year. Total income to be computed as per the prejudice of the Act. Second, simplified tax system. Tax would be beneficial in a number of ways. Excise tax. Tax are imposed on various goods, services, and activities.
Train law. The Train Act is aimed to generate revenue to achieve the 2022 and 2040 vision of the Duterte administration, namely, to eradicate extreme poverty, to create inclusive institutions that will offer equal opportunities to all, and to achieve higher income country status. It is also aimed at making the tax simpler, fairer, and more efficient. So, the tax reform for acceleration in inclusion law, or the TRAIN law, officially designated as Republic Act number 10963. An initial package of comprehension tax reform program, or that CTRP, signed into law by President Rodrigo Duterte on December 19, 2017. The old tax law. In the case of the old tax regime, tax rates are as applicable to individuals below the age of 60 years, including non-resident individuals. To give relief to taxpayers, the simplified tax rate regime requires specified tax deductions and exemptions to be foregone. So, under the current old tax system for personal income taxes, if you are an individual who earns 10,000 pesos to 30,000 pesos per year, you will be taxed 500 pesos plus the 10% of the excess over of 10,000 pesos. This means that, for example, if you are earning a total of 500,000 pesos annual income, then under this new tax system, you will only be taxed with 55,000 pesos. So, kumbaga, prior to the enactment of the new law, an individual's employee or self-employed taxpayer would normally have to pay income tax at the rate of 5% to 32%, depending on one's bracket. So under train law, an individual with a taxable income of 250,000 pesos or less will now be exempt from income tax.